Now over to your moderator, Dr. Paul Shaw.
Thank you. This is Dr. Paul Shaw, and welcome to the second in the series that we're doing on Zero Trust, Transforming Cybersecurity. And in accordance with some of the questions and other things that I've been doing and working across the DoD, I keep getting questions about how Zero Trust would apply to other things, IT, such as critical infrastructure, SCADA systems, and other types of weapon systems. So I wanted to bring to you one of the top experts, and today we're going to have Dr. Aaron Jacobson, who is another one of our cybersecurity professors at Defense Acquisition University. I've been working very closely with him. He is also the lead for Defense Acquisition University on what we're doing on cyber resiliency. And he's doing some amazing work on courses and credentials in that area, along with extensive experience in supporting Navy system security engineering efforts, innovation efforts, software engineering efforts with NAVWAR. He's highly qualified with a very, very well educated Masters of Software Engineering, Masters of Business, and a cybersecurity doctorate, along with extensive cybersecurity certifications. So I wanted to take this occasion to further what we're doing on Zero Trust and help people understand how this applies to other domains besides just IT. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Aaron Jacobson.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Paul, thank you for the introductions. Excited to be here. I'll turn off my camera for a little bit. I'm having some technical issues here with bandwidth, but I'll focus on the slides and then come back on the Q&A section. Let me try to share my slides now. Can you guys see my slides, I'm hoping?
Yes, they're very good. They're excellent, Aaron.
All right, so yeah, thank you, everyone. So the focus of this presentation is on thinking zero trust, actually don't trust. Not necessarily going to focus on specific products or technologies. The focus is really on helping you change that mindset to incorporate zero trust and understand what else is already out there that's complementary to this mindset that we're actually doing today. The brief is made up of publicly sourced information. We're not going to get into too much details on specifics or specific weapon systems or specific control or IT systems. Just the need to apply zero trust to these high availability systems, high performance systems, system of systems, and potentially air gap systems. We need to start thinking about the impact of zero trust on the operational state of a weapon system and a control system. Anything from an oil gas pipeline to an aircraft to a fleet of assets. So let's put on our zero trust baseball cap and start talking weapon systems and critical infrastructures. All right, so I'll once in a while just call out the slides in case you have some video issues. So first, why are we designing resiliency and zero trust? Definitely not because Paul or I said so. Here's the 2022 National Defense Strategy, and let's take a look at some of the key notes here. The strategy came out in an effort for advancing and safeguarding vital U.S. national interest, kinetic and non-kinetic threats, and it mentions the need for increase in resilience. Resilience is defined as our ability to withstand, fight through, and recover quickly from disruption. Some example attacks that led to this memo, the SolarWinds supply chain attack, the JBS meat plant, OPM security breach that many of us were affected by, Colonial Pipeline fuel impacts, and Log4j attacks. Office of the Personnel Management OPM data breach of 2015, that hit home for many of us. Obviously, a zero trust implementation probably would have benefited us there. Here I think 20 plus million records were exposed, not just the DoD civilians, but background information and friends and family as well. So issued May 12, 2021, Biden's executive order stipulates that by the end of the fiscal year 2024, the federal government must advance towards a zero trust architecture. So the NDS, again, didn't just happen overnight. The NDS, the National Defense Strategy, emerged in response to a history of cyber attacks. And this is just kind of that chilling message that we really need to up our game. The threats are there. All right, slide 3, zero trust reference documents. So what is zero trust? Where do I find more information about it? Here's just a screenshot of the roadmap, the strategy, the architectures. There's links below as well. The growing threat of cyber attacks, like the ones mentioned, SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline. Obviously, they highlighted that organizations can no longer depend on conventional perimeter-based defenses, kind of at the fence line to protect our critical systems and data. The Log4j vulnerability is a good indicator that organizations must assume that cyber adversaries are within our networks, requiring these modern resiliency techniques and zero trust. Don't expect that your Java program environment or your operating system native security is going to get all the vulnerabilities out. There's still vulnerabilities, and the attackers, he or she can be within our perimeter. So in zero trust strategy, on the left-hand side, all DoD components must adopt and integrate zero trust capabilities, technologies, solutions, and processes across their architectures, systems, and their budget and executive plans. And then under a zero trust paradigm for cyber resilience, we assume that perimeter defenses may fail, that the adversary may be within our walls, and really one of the key aspects here is fast and computationally inexpensive ways to recover to the original state. All right, so zero trust architectures in an end-to-end approach, to authenticate and authorize data security. So in order to understand the zero trust model, you need to ensure you segregate the users, the devices, the data and services, and it all has to be within a trusted environment. One of the key principles is only validated and permitted requests should be accepted and able to use the data and the networks. So, punchline, you need to be resistant and resilient to attacks, be able to easily and rapidly adjust to the environment. On the right-hand side here are 6 pillars of zero trust. Focus on the user. This is identification, authentication, access, continuous access monitoring. Devices, networks. So under networks, you need to have isolated and segmented networks. Infrastructure. Your systems are protected from unauthorized access and vulnerabilities. Apps, applications, you need security. Data, you need security enforcement. And then when we start talking analysis, we need to start understanding the insight from the communications systems and what can we automate, what can we monitor, really focus on, some of the newer technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and stuff like that. All right, so engineering today for tomorrow's use. What do I mean by this? So for critical infrastructures and weapon systems, control systems, it takes a long time to roll out new critical items. As such, those changes don't happen overnight. So weapon systems and these weapon systems and critical systems, they're not standalone embedded systems. Many are connected to other adjunct systems as well. Many of these embedded systems have autonomous systems connected to them or are autonomous systems, and many are systems of systems. And I'll talk more about what that means in a bit. Most modern embedded systems are connected to a network. This obviously makes them vulnerable to an attack. And then the ones that are air-gapped also makes it vulnerable to attacks because they're not up to date. Operating systems and patches are typically not up to date. And then at some point, you do need to update those systems. So there's an increasingly amount of reliance on cloud computing, other entities for data analysis, for mission updates. Again, that's part of the attack surface. Network-based attacks can occur during maintenance and insider attacks. This includes the supply chain. Many embedded systems have only loose security postures. This is due to cost, complexity, interoperability, to implement a more robust security solution. And a lot of this isn't, by neglect. That was, at the time when a lot of these systems were developed, a perimeter-based approach was what was being pushed, edge-based security. So, generic question, and you don't have to answer this obviously, but is your systems that you're working on, are they secured with a basic user ID and password that grants them broad admin privileges, or do you have kind of a zero trust security at every turn and that type of thing? So punchline here: embedded systems can benefit from zero trust and resiliency engineering, but you really have to know how to integrate it. And again, this is just a wake-up call. How do we start making these things work together? How do we system engineer zero trust into our critical infrastructures? All right, so a little comical example here. Let's talk operations and resiliency. So here's a comical example. Here we have a flat tire. The tire manufacturers develop tires to spec. They don't figure out your mission. They don't know if you're going to drive at night through construction zones, through debris, right on curbs. They don't know any of that stuff. They're just building a rubber tire. So whether you're going to drive through construction zones and stuff like that, that's on the mission owner. So how do we play this into a scenario? So imagine you're driving down I-95 if you're on the East Coast, and you get a flat tire. So even if you have a flat tire or a spare tire in your trunk, is it inflated? Do you have the tools to change it? And then most importantly, do you remember how to do this? So how do we test this? So, the silly answer would be, drive down I-95 at 2 a.m, pull off on the shoulder, pop your tire, and then see if, you're ready to change that tire, if your spare tire is available, and all the other things as well. This can be, any, aspect of the vehicle. It doesn't have to be the tire. It could be your smart key. The smart key failed, when you're, at a gas station or something. So now let's extend this silly example to enterprise networks. Attacks such as ransomware attacks. Is your network backed up? Where's the backup? Is the backup susceptible to the same ransomware attack? Did you test your backups? Were your backups, attacked as well by the ransomware, or are they loaded on an offsite somewhere? How long does it take? Is it hours? Is it days? Is it weeks? So all these things cost money to kind of, figure out and implement. Some have safety and security issues like the flat tire. So one thing that, pushing is an MBSE, model-based system engineering approach. Here you can model that adversity, whether it's a cyber adversity or just an operator issue or a software issue or hardware issue. All that can be modeled, and that resiliency and those zero trust approaches can be automated and analyzed from a model-based approach. So I'll talk more about the MBSE approach in a bit. Lost my mouse here. All right, so I get asked this a lot. What are the requirements? There's a ton of statutory and regulatory requirements. There's also KPPs, key performance parameters. So yes, critical systems and weapon systems have KPPs. We have net ready KPPs. Up here on the top left, the net ready KPPs are for net centric military operations. We have sustainment KPPs and supporting metrics for availability, reliability, maintainability, and total cost of ownership. And then we have system survivability KPPs. This is going to be kind of a big part of the discussion for today. Within here is the cyber survivability endorsement, and there's the cyber survivability attributes on the right-hand side. So underneath system survivability, we have 4 pillars: prevent, mitigate, recover, and adapt. And they can be traced to these CSAs on the right-hand side here. We'll talk heavily about CSA1, control access, but lots of CSAs, lots of great language that can be leveraged. And just going down, the list here, prevent, mitigate, recover, adapt. Prevent is the ability to anticipate or resist a cyber event. Mitigate is the ability to withstand and absorb the cyber event. Recover is the ability to recover from that event to fight another day. And then adapt is really focused on, doing things differently, whether it's a DevSecOps approach or some other approach to support operational resiliency. I'll touch a little bit more on these CSAs in a bit, but this is one of the key things that when we talk zero trust, when we talk secure cyber resilient engineering, we want to make sure that we engineer in harmony and have this awareness. All right, so another big one I want to bring up, DoD I 5000.83. Last week we had a webinar with Burhan Adam, and he presented the DoD I 5000.83, specifically a topic within their cross-domain solutions, CDS. So 5000.83, this establishes responsibilities and procedures to manage system security and cyber security technical risk. Some of the keys that I want to point out for zero trust. So underneath SCREE and DoDI 5000.83, some key specifics are allocating cybersecurity system security requirements to system architectures and design, and assessing those designs for vulnerabilities. At a minimal, trying to address the managed access to and use of system and system resources. In this world, this could be a cross-domain solution. This could be encryption. Additionally, we want to make sure that systems are structured to protect and preserve system functions and resources. This can be using segmentation, separation, isolation, and partitioning. Additionally, we want to maintain priority system functions under adverse conditions. So it's not an all or nothing. Do we have degraded states? Can we, continue the mission? So in a little bit, we'll talk about specific approaches to address security and cyber resiliency. But this is one of the foundational artifacts that we want to make sure we understand from a big picture and how it interacts with other security disciplines. All right, so before I dive into weapon systems and critical infrastructures, just want to get everybody on the same page on a basic network-based attack for an enterprise or IT network. Using a similar example to the recent Uber attacks. Here, the system had MFA, multi-factor authentication. Many of you guys are familiar with. However, not all multi-factor authentication is created equally. Some is a push base where, you get you just hit a button on your phone, or, you get an email that says, click on this button. Others, you got to press and enter numbers or passcodes. And again, one of the attack vectors that we see are multi-factor authentication fatigue, where somebody's calling you, 15 times a night saying your Amazon, password, expired or has been compromised. You need to, click yes to identify, and then that's actually the attack vector. So what can you do about it? What are some things from a kind of a zero trust approach? What would zero trust do? Hardware tokens or random multi-factor authentication codes. Social engineering training your teams to be aware of these tactics, how to prevent those things. Now moving down, once the attacker has, initial access to use social engineering, they got in your system, they can now pivot, get access to, system resources, including scripts and PowerShells. Is that acceptable? Not from a zero trust perspective. What can we do about it? Network monitoring, segmentation, least privilege, obviously not give them the attacker privileges to get these PowerShells. As the attacker is moving through your networks, one script could have hard-coded credentials, in a specific instance. That could have administrative accounts and things like that. So what can you do about it? Obviously, things like encryption, continuous verification, not give them, one initial login from the perimeter, like a VPN, and they have access to everything. They need to continuously verify. And then, again, more pivoting through the networks. How do you resolve this? Being aware of that user on your networks, constantly re-authenticating. But however, one of the keys I want to mention here, though, you need to system engineer this. You can't have, pop-ups and screens happening, during a mission. So this has to work in harmony. Your hardware software solution has to work with the operator in mind. So it's not just, hey, throw these, 200 controls, 200 security mechanisms at the system. You have to understand what the end goal is as well. So always keep that in mind. Okay, so now I want to start digging in to the real, security and resiliency from the ground up for weapon systems, for control systems, and the likes. At our last talk, David talked about fusing intelligence and threat information. Do you have this information, all your components on your systems? You may have some, you may not have any. So here on this screen, this is the building blocks within our systems, and then within our systems of systems. I'll talk a little bit about an Air Max and commercial aircrafts in a minute. And then a lot of these, like the control systems, industrial control systems, SCADA systems, they enable operators to monitor sensors. This could be an example like an oil gas pipeline that regulates oil flow, increasing and decreasing. If you have sensors and interfaces, can a cyber attack affect that? Can somebody, an APT, advanced persistent threat, can they adjust your control flow and manipulate your display screens so that your system isn't running to peak performance, or even more detrimental, doing something even worse? So we need to start thinking of applying zero trust to critical infrastructures, such as control and weapon systems. There is a risk of cyber attack or other forms of adversity, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a cyber attack. It could be, any supporting infrastructure issue, or a software issue, or a hardware issue, or operator issue. But these can all lead to major disruptions of service and systems. Many of these systems are designed to be in production for many years, outlive what their expectations, were originally designed for. So we need to address this problem from an engineering perspective. And here, on the bottom right, I have, system engineering activities, performance, reliability, maintainability, safety, system security, manufacturing, supportability. And then I have the other trade-offs that you have to engineer with zero trust: anti-tamper, cybersecurity, exportability, hardware, software assurance, et cetera, et cetera. So let's start from the bottom of this slide and work our way up. So here we got chips. So we need to have protection against silicon backdoor attacks and Trojans, exploitable firmware and software. So are all your chips made in the U.S.? Are a lot of them made overseas? Are they trusted? So those are things you got to start asking. So, if you're a home builder and you're building a house, do you build your house if the cement foundation has cracks in it, the slab, is cracked, or, are you looking for a solid, slab? You don't always have a choice. Sometimes you got to, this is the foundation. This is where I live. And then moving up at the board level, protection against test points, intrusion detection. Moving up to the box level, protection against exploits from trust relationships, operating systems, applications, faults. And then specifically against these critical infrastructures, bus level cyber resilience, protection against rogue devices, man in the middle. This can be an IP network. This can be a CAN bus network for vehicles, or this could be a MIL standard network. It doesn't matter. You got to have protection there. And then at the platform level and system of systems levels, protection against, external stuff, supply chain, insider threats. At the platform level, you really need awareness of what I call the cyber warning light. This can be connected to a policy engine, in zero trust. Is your data faulty? Are you going to accept it from an external source? So we really need to understand security and resiliency from the ground up. It's really hard to just kind of throw it at one piece, whether it's buses and networks, boxes or chips or systems of systems. You have to start thinking holistically and a system engineering approach to it. All right, so this is just another slide kind of focused on the same message here. Where is your resiliency in your business systems, in your control systems, and critical infrastructure, and your weapon systems, photon torpedoes, X-wing fighters, whatever you're developing. Does your security and resiliency level change? So right now I got these all as green. Obviously, you color code what your systems are. Does that level change when you integrate it with other platforms, other systems? How about when your IT systems are connected to your control systems or your weapon systems? Does that change that color there? So let's take a vertical look here at the system of systems from the bottom. Let's look at supply chain. What does your supply chain look like for your control systems, for your weapon systems? Your trusted manufacturing for hardware, firmware and BIOS, operating system and hypervisors. In bold, I have some of the deltas. So in your business and IT systems, you may not have safety critical or mission critical systems, for your timesheet or your logistics database. But in your control system, controlling an oil gas pipeline or a weapon system, you probably have safety and mission critical functions and critical components. Your application development, your software distribution, how do you update software? Is it, once every 3 years, or do you have a DevSecOps approach to that? Another variable here, network monitoring. You might have an IP-based network for your business and IT systems. You may not for your control and your weapon systems. Additionally, you may hear some different terminologies in incident response, business continuity. In your control systems and weapon systems, you might hear resiliency. How do you fight the fight in a degraded mode, things of that nature. And then operational cyber awareness. Are you even aware that you're under cyber attack? Is your system instrumented? I'll talk more about sentinels and design patterns that give you the awareness at all levels that there's an issue, that there's an attack going on. So again, big picture, and then system of systems when all these things are tied together. All right, so attacks on critical systems. What do we need to be concerned about here? What types of attacks can happen in your weapon systems and control systems? So on the left-hand side here, just some cartoon, pictures of a destructive attack. This includes attacks on anything from control servers, communication networks, embedded systems, physical devices, software supply chain, and those silicon chips. On the right-hand side, I got information tactics, stealing and manipulations. What does this mean? Here we got vulnerabilities in communication protocols. And in this situation, a hacker can be monitoring your drones. They can be monitoring your vehicle, looking at your GPS, where you're going, radar stuff. And that can be, just from an eavesdropping perspective, or they could take control of that drone or that car and do damage, make it drive somewhere where it shouldn't drive or crash it into something. Recall Air France Flight 447, here an Airbus crashed in the Atlantic Ocean. I believe it was concluded that the aircraft had inconsistency in airspeed measurements. This was potentially from icing, on the sensors, ice crystals on the sensors. So this was a sensor-based issue. Could a cyber attack take advantage of that? Exploit those software and hardware weaknesses and flaws? Yeah, so potentially. So anything that can happen, software or hardware, mechanically, a cyber attack could take advantage of that. So these are some of the key, generic approaches that we want to start addressing and understanding. All right, so again, there are significant differences with weapon system and control systems. We need to first understand the problem space, and those deltas. Weapon systems have a lot of embedded systems without direct access. System access, which is here where I'm stating you're replacing human users with applications and systems, and they have high availability requirements and deterministic processing requirements. Excuse me. So we need to build secure systems that address the hardware, software, the protocols, and their interplay amongst them. What can an insider threat or nearsider do if they gain access to your hardware? In zero trust and resiliency, we need to address those approaches that the adversary is beyond the perimeter and is moving laterally through your systems of systems. So at the bottom here, it's really crucial that we have isolation, segmentation, separation, and sandboxing. This really makes it harder, the attack surface harder for the adversary. We'll talk about SCRE, Secure Cyber Resilient Engineering, in a minute. But SCRE addresses some of these by managing access to and the use of system resources. This could be by a CDS, cross-domain solution, encryption, or other approaches. Additionally, SCRE toolboxes bring in some functions of how to preserve and build segmentation, separation, isolation, partitioning, and manage priority of resources in under adverse conditions. And the last thing, I mentioned this earlier, but machine trust, continuous access control, and not just of the users, the people, but of the systems that may be interacting similarly to a user. Are they trusted or are they not? All right, so quickly, just, kind of a high-level slide on SCRE, what it means from my perspective. Really incorporating adversity and behaviors of the systems, understanding the missions. There are some really good engineering tools, when used, could achieve some of those zero trust principles. So does your system have awareness from a cyber perspective? I mentioned earlier Sentinels, and Sentinels are just a design pattern that tells you, are you under a cyber attack? Do you have resiliency techniques in place if you are under cyber attack? Do you have a backup? If you're in your car and your GPS goes down and you don't know how to use a map, do you have a backup system? What do you do from that point? Another approach that we're bringing into SCRE heavily is modeling. So modeling, model-based system engineering. This is a methodology used to support requirements, design, analysis, V&V, verification, validation of complex systems. One of the approaches we're bringing in is loss-based engineering. Here you're prioritizing those losses of those control systems and those weapon systems. Then adding good engineering, security, and resiliency to the MBSE model itself. So likewise, we can ingest zero trust capabilities, bring it into a model, understand the loss-based approach. Again, it all fits in well with the systems reliability KPPs and the CSAs. All these can be interacted and traced accordingly in a model, and work with the other security disciplines. All right, so this slide here, really just some of those resiliency techniques I want to mention. The link below is down here if you want to read more. This is from the resiliency techniques from 800-160, volume 2. There's other resiliency techniques. Just want to point out, 2 here, redundancy and diversity. So redundancy, here is the resiliency technique. Some of the approaches are, protected backups and restore or replication. So having, multiple components, say I'm in my autonomous car and I got a backup navigation system, 2 systems, but they're the exact same implementation. Well, that adversary could attack both of them with the same attack vector. So I need diversity. I need those 2 navigation systems be different navigation systems to have, a different operating system, different hardware structure, so that those attacks cannot bring both navigation systems and I can still complete those missions. So again, zero trust can leverage some of these tools, and this is just a subset of some of those resiliency tools out there. Here are those 14 resiliency tools from NIST 160 Volume 2. Yeah, so just looking at a couple here: privilege restrictions, segmentation, substantiated integrity, zero trust can obviously leverage and trace to some of those. Cyber resiliency techniques that implement zero trust architectures can limit attacks, prevent attackers from moving laterally through the networks. Once your network is then segmented, using these resiliency approaches, it's much easier to then do things like virtualization, where you can take advantage of smaller chunks of segmented domains, data, networks, and everything else. Zero trust, again, can work hand in hand by rapidly recovering, having a pristine backup that can automatically, back up or flush out that malicious code. So once you do have, all this understood, you have virtualization. Now you can start talking and implementing things like adaptive responses, analytic monitoring, and coordinated protection. All right, a few more slides and I'll wrap it up. So supply chain scenarios at the chip level. What's the origin of your chips? Many chips have no authentication. So if you're thinking about we're in our car, we have sensors here. These chips may not have authentication. They may come from foreign countries, untrusted sources, and this obviously applies to control and weapon systems as well. And then system of systems, a vehicle interacting with other vehicles in the future, infrastructures and grids and stuff like that. What do you trust on the other end? How do you interact? So understanding your chips and trust there is critical. Having secure boot processes and handshakes amongst these systems of systems is critical. Another key factor that want to leverage from the security world is microsegmentation, network segmentation. Microsegmentation is the deployment of virtual firewalls at every virtual network interface where traffic enters and leaves. This is really an essential part of moving from that network-based approach to a data-centric approach. We're segmenting the users, the applications, the workloads, systems, devices, et cetera. And again, the smaller chunks that we can make, the smaller your attack surface is, the harder it is for them to get the crown jewels. Network segmentation as well. Segmenting those networks is critical here. This applies further as well. So, applying this to embedded systems, you can have a separation kernel. Here, you can use this to support microsegmentation. This can be used by, an access control list or something like that. And that access control list has to be secure. It can't be monitored or altered during runtime. So something to think about. These are things that can access, and only those things can use the resources. All right, another one. So device sandboxing. This is described in NIST 800-207. This is really, an approach to sandbox virtual machines. In this scenario, vetted applications run compartmentalized on assets. You're really separating everything. And you could bring this down even further, where you have trust applications and untrust applications. And then even one level below, you can have what I call capability-based separation, where you have zero kernel operating systems as well. So, and again, this relates well to the cyber resiliency techniques. Machine credentialing, I mentioned that all earlier. Here's your cockpit of your 737 Air Max. Here's just one component of that Air Max, the MCAS system, systems of systems, and then these have communications, ensuring that you have machine-to-machine credentials, same theme, least privilege, only the privileges that you need, and one component is not able to impact the other component. Quickly, I know I'm running out of time here. Zero trust using blockchain. Blockchain is an approach to substantiate integrity. On our Great Power Competition website, I uploaded a video for y'all to look at, just an approach to how blockchain can help provide some of those substantiated integrities for zero trust. Overlapping, Paul, I got two. This is just wrapping it up now. Overlapping cyber processes. Again, here's kind of the problem space. Let's engineer these all together, not have these as separate processes and duplicate. Let's engineer everything together, including zero trust. Program office responsibilities, again, integrating these all together in harmony. Working with RMF, working with hardware and software assurance, supply chain risk management. One of the big things is to understand cost, financial comprehension of zero trust, and then obviously understanding security of the mission. So at the end of the day, security practitioners, we need to be mindful of that mission. So we need to help support that mission, enable secure communications, secure processing for that mission, not hinder them and stop their mission. So some resources here if you want to read more about the Technology and Protection Guidebook and Zero Trust Strategy. And then last slide. Here I just took a mission thread. Here's a CWE from the common weakness enumeration. Traced it to various security disciplines, security resiliency techniques. From improper access control, you can have CDSs, cross-domain solutions, encryption, privilege restrictions, substantiated integrity. Looking across the CSAs, CSA1, control access, RMF, access control, SI controls, IA controls, and then zero trust. What are your policy engine enforcements, your trust algorithms, your MFA, your ICAMs? So all these have to work and engineer together. Here's a comical description of a fence, protecting your house. The requirements may be these metal poles have to be, in the ground 10 feet, 15 feet in the air, have a curved architecture so you can't climb up. Well, if your neighbor has the same thing, then an adversary could obviously just climb over, or your neighbor could climb over one end to the other. So it all has to work together. Again, the theme here is really to system engineer these approaches. And I know I'm about 3 minutes past where I wanted to be, but over to you, Dr. Paul, for Q&A.
Well, outstanding, Aaron. And I think you keep reinforcing the theme that all of these things have to be considered together. So we have the zero trust strategy, the architecture, the capability roadmap, but these cannot be done in isolation. This still has to be done in conjunction with what your program might be doing for risk management framework, what they might be doing with the net-ready KPPs, the CSAs you brought up. So all of this has to be considered together. And one of the comments I wanted to make, just for clarification, is today you were talking a lot about critical systems. We were talking critical infrastructure systems, which tend to be considered operational technology. So these are the different than necessarily your information technology, where you're usually focused on data security. Here we're focused on maintaining control authority, industrial control system, SCADA system. So if I'm talking the power grid or other things, there's all sorts of elements across that transmission grid that have timing critical, safety critical implications that I may still be able to do the zero trust principles and implement them at points, but I've got to take those into consideration when I'm doing these principles and understand that difference between IT and OT. I know you actually talked a lot about quite a few OT systems when you were getting into machine critical, or you were giving some of your examples, but I just want to emphasize that zero trust can apply. And what I think you were doing a phenomenal job today of talking about what is the engineering that we have to consider behind this to achieve our objectives and have these different things work together, resiliency and zero trust. I do have one comment, and you'd probably be the best to answer this. Sometimes there could be potential conflicts between what we might do for resiliency, cyber resiliency, and what we might be doing in a zero trust strategy. How would you best approach the conflicts between the two?
Yeah, Paul, thank you. That's a great question. So I think my answer is always you got to engineer and you have to work together. So, if you're if you're building a weapon system or control system, that lead system engineer has to have full awareness of all the different requirements and all the activities going on, and they have to balance and make those trade-offs. And really, again, I get back to the mission. That mission has a mission, and it has to succeed. So all those requirements, the security requirements, they have to support that mission and be complementary. So I think my answer in short is they have to be complementary. You will find deltas. You will find, I think it's how you apply them and how you tailor and how you cater them. That's something that obviously you and I can help, the workforce with and various others out there. But that is the hard part of knowing what's applicable to your system and how to make it apply to your system. By default, every mission is different. So there's no checklist that, one size fits all, use this product. And that's typically why we say zero trust isn't a product. It's that mindset, it's that architecture, that philosophy. So it's not one product, it's that mindset, and you have to integrate it with the mission and the other security disciplines to make it work. I brought up CDSs and encryption. How do you work with those philosophies, those other security disciplines that are already there?
Well, and sometimes we do things with an unintended consequence. I remember years ago when we started our cyber, we actually created an attack vector into weapon systems when we started monitoring them and providing information out that hadn't existed before. So, there was a question in the chat about that, and it's a great question. And anytime we do something, we have to be aware of the consequences and make sure that the side effects or the consequences aren't worse than what we're achieving for the benefit. And quite frankly, in this realm, my experience, because I'm also a GICSP and work with control systems like yourself and weapon systems, we have to certain times be aware of other things that could override what we might be doing at zero trust. Like if there's a timing critical or a safety critical requirement, that might override what we would do, or if we can't interfere with that requirement at the point that we'd be doing this. My experience has been usually when I start diagramming out the system and I understand where it's working with the network or how it's connected to the network, I can start figuring out where I would apply zero trust and where I may not apply zero trust. So I keeps getting back to your point that we have to add this into our security requirements, and that we have to work through this from an engineering and architecture perspective to understand what this is doing to us. And quite frankly, there's a couple things that all of us should do, and I'll talk more about this next month in the seminar on implementation plans. But we have to make sure that we're not impacting the end user, we're not impacting the mission, and that we understand the trade space of what we might be doing in one domain by domain. And quite frankly, it can get tricky. There can be a lot of engineering. I saw quite a few questions because you did an excellent discussion of the net-ready KPPs with the cybersecurity attributes. And, not everybody has gone to the same level of rigor on those in their systems. Not everybody's had that requirement. But when we get to the critical infrastructure, oftentimes we start getting to those requirements of the CSAs. And our weapon systems, our platforms, our critical infrastructure components, the electric grid, the financial grid, the transportation grid for like gas, water distribution, or water treatment facilities. These are all the 16 elements of the critical infrastructure that we have to consider how they work together. There's a interesting question. Is there a DAU level for 1, 2, and 3 on zero trust architecture? No, we haven't done that. That's a great idea. In fact, I'm trying to do that. And quite frankly, what Aaron and I are working on is trying to help develop the engineering to support your efforts in zero trust, and how we can go through this. Some of the other questions that came up that I just would think would be a good thing to emphasize here. is one of the questions was talking about the difference between endpoint systems where we can do comply to connect, vice zero trust with like bring your own device. And how do we adjudicate, or well, let me put it this way, since oftentimes you're starting with a weapon system or a critical infrastructure system, a SCADA system, the power grid or something like that, what's your best starting point to understand this and start incorporating the zero trust requirements with the other security requirements that this system might have?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Comply to connect, versus zero trust. I think I think they work hand in hand, and zero trust could use comply to connect as a technique. Again, I'm a big fan of MBSE and modeling, understanding the requirements. So if anything is being put out to a contractor to develop, they need clear requirements. It's got to be in writing. It's got to be tangible. It's got to be understood and testable. So I'm a big fan of early modeling, putting, whatever your photon torpedo is or your X fighter, putting that in a model, understanding the adversity, understand where zero trust fits in, and then seeing those trade-offs and really understanding either the complementary activities or the gaps. And when I say complementary activities, you don't want to dual fund the same activity, calling it two different names, one under a CSA, one under zero trust. Need to understand both of them. What are we trying to get at? How are we trying to prevent the attack? And a different type of approach might be able to, address it as well. Well, I did. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aaron. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I did see. I was seeing a lot of comments about bringing in some of these technologies, and they might actually hurt the problem. And I was just going to mention, yeah, that's critical. So we really need, for control systems and weapon systems, you really need maturity. You don't want something that's, that in itself can be used as an attack vector. So here you got, I see people talking MBSE models. Here, that's a model, the entire environment. Or, someone mentioned the Sentinel itself. That is a system that monitors everything. And we've seen in the industry that some of those are the attack vectors for the adversary. So those security mechanisms have to be more secure than the system they are protecting itself. They need to be hardened and secured, because they could, again, be a threat vector themselves. They could increase the attack surface.
Yeah, and by the way, in zero trust, a couple comments were talking like where does detection come in and how does detection come in? As we create these capabilities, oftentimes what we're doing is giving ourselves a better ability to detect a more capable adversary. And when you get a more capable adversary, they typically blend in to your normal network operation. So if they get past your perimeter, they can be very difficult to detect in your system because they just look like normal network activity. Where when I start going to zero trust principles and concepts, I give myself a better ability to detect an activity that might be something that a more advanced adversary would use, even though they're looking like just a normal traffic in my network. What there is a consequence for that is, as we do these zero trust things and the programs I've been working with, we often find that the operations centers, the cyber operations centers have a significant impact and a significant increase in data and things that they needed to look at. And if that hasn't been coordinated between the program office and what they did in zero trust and the operations center when the system is in the environment, it can be a significant problem. So, I think it's critical. And as we go forward in this webinar series and in the your classes and my classes, when we teach about zero trust, we always talk about a balance between engineering, cyber operations, and our understanding of the threat tactics. And that balance between those three is absolutely critical. And it's very critical in this area when we can apply these principles to critical infrastructure, but we have to be careful. We have to understand the consequences, and we have to really do this from an engineering and architecture perspective. So the one comment about DAU developing different levels of security engineering and architecture for zero trust and resiliency. Aaron, that sounds like a task to you and I, but that's a really good idea. And we probably need to be doing that and continuing in this series of, how to help you succeed in your efforts as you take these DoD strategies and policies and go forward. I'll give the last 2 minutes to you, and then we're going to need to close it up and turn it over. But wonderful presentation today. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to see if there's any last questions. There's so many, it's hard to, know which one to jump on. But I will say, our contact information's on the slide deck. So, feel free to, reach out to me or Paul. I'd love to engage, specifics, with anyone, that was out there. And furthermore, again, we do more than just teach and webinars. We're here to hands-on, create mission assistance, roll up our sleeves, and support the end goal, the war fighters. At the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad to be here. Really enjoy the topic of zero trust, and it's early, it's new, it's a learning process, and we really need to make and do it, effectively and cost of, it's got to be minimal cost burden. With everything else going on, it can't be an additional significant cost to the program offices and the taxpayers.
Yeah, we've got to make sure that the benefit is worse than, what we achieve as we do this is worth the cost, worth the effort, and I believe it can be. But this gets back to what you continually and I continually keep saying. It requires good engineering. It requires an understanding of our architecture. Unfortunately, in zero trust, now every vendor out there now markets zero trust, and it's become the buzzword du jour. And my experience is there's not a simple solution that you can buy, but there are some great capabilities that you might incorporate that would really help your efforts to counter more advanced threats. And that's really what we're trying to get to. We in the DoD are going beyond traditional perimeter defense. The high-end commercial industry, the Amazon, the Googles, the Microsofts have very much embraced zero trust for the last decade. And it's become a core way for them to secure their systems and provide secure services out. And when we understand and apply the principles correctly, they can be very powerful. So Aaron, as always, it's a pleasure working with you. And it's an honor to continue to work across the DoD and other federal agencies on how we might help you achieve your security objectives going forward. So please contact us. And this is, we do collect your questions. We incorporate those into future materials. We use those in our other lessons, and we look forward to helping you achieve your objectives. Because at DAU, we succeed when you succeed. With that, I'd like to close it and turn it back over to our producer. So Christy, please take it away.
Thank you for attending today. Please remember to access a short survey at the link we provided in chat. After the survey, you can request a certificate which you can use to request one continuous learning point for attending today. Follow your organizational guidance regarding requesting CLPs, and remember, CLPs for DAU events will not post automatically to your CL transcript and must be requested separately. A video of today's event will be available at the event page no later than Friday. Registration is now open for next month's Zero Trust webinar. Visit the event site at dau.edu to register today. DAU is much more than what you see in the classroom. We offer consulting, coaching, customized solutions, and executive support. Visit Consulting Services for more information. And if you have ideas for future speakers, send us an email to events@dau.edu. DAU offers a variety of open enrollment workshops every month. Visit the virtual campus to see available workshops and other events at dau.edu. We also offer a variety of online events every month. Registration is easy, just go to the events page and sign up today. Remember to visit dau.edu/events to see recordings of past events and register for future events. That concludes today's event. Thank you for visiting DAU. Have a great day.